Welcome to Trinity Radio. I am Braxton Hunter, and he is
Jonathan Pritchett.
And for those of you that noticed last week, we appreciate it, but we now have the video screens set up so that it actually does look like we're looking at each other when we are actually looking at each other. So we're glad that you all are here. This is an interesting episode because, to my knowledge, Jonathan, we have not responded to podcasts. Maybe once a long time ago, but when we were doing the Wyma series, but we just respond to YouTube channels, and we've done articles, blog articles, things like that. And books, we've talked about books, but to do a podcast is somewhat new. So
do we still have a podcast?
Yes. And I have to say that I did update it like 10 episodes or more, like a couple of weeks ago. I'm trying to catch up.
Do people still listen to it?
Yes.
Do we still have more people who listen to it than watch on YouTube like we used to?
No, I don't. Well, maybe. I don't know. I'll have to look.
Yeah.
But Jim Amberg, thank you so much for this super chat.
Jim, thank you.
That means so much.
He's our angel.
I motion that we start with the Egad Jones intro every week.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that.
I would play that one. I'll play that at the end. Well, I don't know if I still have it. Maybe we'll see. Depends on how much Jonathan talks during the episode.
I'm not here to talk.
Thank you all for being here. Tatiana is here. I'm happy that everyone is here, but I haven't seen Tatiana comment publicly in a long time. Yeah. She says she's still there. She's just been lurking, but we're so glad that you're here. And when I got on the David Wood's YouTube channel about a year ago, it was mostly because of people like her, predominantly her, encouraging him to do that. So
cool.
All right. So what we're going to do today is so I recently did 10 questions for atheists in 2021. There's still people making video responses to 10 questions for atheists that was from last year, but now there are some people responding to this one. And, last time we did it week by week, and we did it. Some of them as live streams like this, and some of them were just me going through, and we would take each week and look at a different questions that I asked and how like 5 or 6 atheists responded. Those are all on a playlist on our channel that you can go check out. We're not going to do that exactly this time. It's just that we have all that all that good information, all those good responses that then we can pull from for episodes like this when we want to. And so that's just how we do this. Mike Winger is here. He says this better be good or else. Well,
prepare to be disappointed.
But all right, so let's jump into this. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to a not as attractive of a screen, and I'm not going to play their entire response. Primarily, I wanted to, in this video, just respond to my question number 2, which has to do with the question of whether there is anything that the particular atheist responding considers to be good evidence for God that Christian apologists or philosophers might bring. And I thought they brought up some interesting things. By the way, the podcast is Still Unbelievable, as I think a response to Unbelievable the Podcast, which is a Christian podcast. This is Still Unbelievable, and these guys are super nice. I know I say, hey, I really like this guy. That was one of the things from last week that we saw. Tell me you watch Trinity Radio without telling me you watch Trinity Radio was me saying, I really like this guy. He seems like a nice guy. I could be his friend. With these guys, that is absolutely true. They were super cool.
You could be anyone's friend. It's whether or not they'd be your friend. That's typically how this works.
I guess that's true. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump in, and we're going to do this. Now, when your questions come up, I will save those, and we will get to them. I see some of you already asking questions there. So let's jump right into this not as attractive screen.
Question
Here we go.
2.
Question number 2. Is there anything that Christian apologists or philosophers bring that you actually do consider to be good evidence for God? And if not, how do you define evidence? And before they answer, what you see in the background, that word, what do they call those? That word
collage
salad is just their logo. It says Still Unbelievable right in the middle, but I don't know. I wanted something to represent them. And the link to this episode is in the description, their podcast. And this is the most recent episode, is the one about my 10 questions.
This is one of our favourite topics, isn't it, Andrew? We've battered this one around a few times, haven't we?
We have.
And in fact, there's a variation of this question coming up as well. So, here. But there's a similar sort of question coming up. It's less technical, but it asks almost the same thing, really. This is that whole challenge about philosophy, apologetics, and evidence. Do you want to say it, or shall I say it?
Go ahead.
Arguments are not evidence. Can we have an amen?
Amen. So they're not. This is most apparent, even in a world of logic and syllogisms, right? Arguments aren't evidence because they can only ever provide half of an answer. So a syllogism can only be true when we're talking about the natural world if it is both well-formed, right? The conclusion proceeds necessarily from the premises, and it's actually true about the world. So if I said all snakes are mammals and Matthew is a snake, therefore Matthew is a mammal, the argument's perfectly reasonably constructed. It leads to a deductive conclusion, but the conclusion is false. Why? Because the way we define mammal excludes snakes. So that should always tell you arguments aren't evidence.
Yeah, basically the dictionary definition of evidence is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. And what apologists and philosophers bring are what Andrew's just been describing, syllogisms or structures or arguments, which usually have these facts or information built in as part of their proposition or their premises. So the argument brings the evidence and tries to draw a conclusion from the evidence. But what could an apologist or a philosopher bring that could be defined as evidence for God? Well, not really an argument. They need to.
Okay, let's stop right there. And Pritchett, I have things that I want to say about this. I could just go right into that. And let you follow. Okay, so first of all, I love. Have you still got Rasmussen's book? You can hold up there. Most people that are in this realm interested in the things we're interested in. That's the book, God to Lead, Can Reason How, by Josh Rasmussen, How Reason Can Lead to God. And what that book, what he uses repeatedly as a theme throughout, or a image for what we're doing throughout that book, is a bridge. And he's saying, like, as we're reasoning, we're constructing a bridge. And if you took what these guys are saying all the way, then not only would it be self-referentially incoherent for themselves, because what experiment demonstrates for sure that science is the way to get to knowledge, the only way to get to knowledge, which I don't think they would say that. I think these guys would not necessarily say that, but almost everything they say in this department seems to require that.
They may not want to say it, but that's what it ultimately leads to, because they said arguments can't get you anywhere unless they're strictly dealing with the natural world. Mm-hmm. And then went further and say, insofar as even if you have a formally valid argument, the definitions have to be correct, even if your argument is formally valid. Right. And so if you're going the latter is, of course, just true and adds nothing to what they're trying to say. But the former part about the natural world having to be the only thing that's available for us to verify is a presupposition, and it can't be underwritten by the very thing that it's purporting to affirm.
Right. And that's what Mad Robot here says. What experiment proves the axioms that all of science is built off of? And in case you think that I'm straw manning them, maybe I am, but I certainly don't mean to. And what I can tell you is that in the podcast episode, they did say, well, that's what science does. It does blah, blah, blah. So it seems like they're treating science as the only way to knowledge. Let's see.
Well,
okay,
naturalism anyway, that the only way that a argument, like a logical argument that's formally valid, can get you the complete truth of something is if you're analyzing natural things.
Yeah.
But that's backed up by the idea that, well, only science gives us information about natural things. And if you're dealing with supernatural things, or whatever you want to call it, no matter what you're defining, you can never demonstrate it. So it's back to...
Yeah, and also we have this question. Actually, Darren Plies says this here, but then arguments against arguments are not evidence. So like they are presenting reasons,
Yeah.
philosophical, even if it's not framed as an argument, a philosophical argument, they are presenting a philosophical explanation of why this doesn't work.
Yeah, but
right?
then they have to prove
Why
that,
philosophical
which
reasoning.
gets back to, then they have to demonstrate that,
Yeah.
which gets back to the question begging about science.
Right.
So,
Is my take. And again, I want to say, I think these guys are super nice, and I think they're smart guys. I'm just trying to point out what I see as problematic.
and
here.
I mean, so it's self-defeating because they can't demonstrate it by their own standard. But you know, it's almost as if you know,
While
to
you're
even
thinking of how
well,
to
I mean,
put
to
that,
even attempt it,
Mhm.
if you could prove it,
Yeah.
that also is self-defeating.
Right.
If you can prove it by your
Yeah,
own.
right.
So it's self-defeating either way you go.
Now, it could be that this mugger fugger, be careful how you say that, is correct. And I mean, maybe this is one of the guys from the podcast for all I know. I did tag them in the Twitter thing, but I don't know that it is. But they say, you're right. Nobody's saying science is the only way to knowledge. It works because if it is continued reliability.
Yes, but their claim was about arguments, about
Right.
using deductive arguments and logic. Their claim was you can't ever get to the whole truth
Mhm.
unless you're dealing with the natural world.
Mhm. Well, and
so that statement has to be underwritten by something,
Yeah.
which leads us to everything we just said. In the
Right.
book.
And so back to Josh Rasmussen, and he's using a bridge. And what his point is we can actually go out much further with this bridge as we build it. It can get us much further than you think it can. So, for example, using arguments and reason and these sorts of things, we can just from us thinking here, I would say we can get to something that we can know about the whole universe. And that is if we accept the law of non-contradiction, which is pretty solid, then we can know that there are no two-dimensional square circles anywhere in the universe.
Right.
No married bachelors anywhere in the universe. And we don't know that because we traveled the whole universe and looked everywhere and didn't find any, the evidence, right? We got there rationally, thinking about things, building on that bridge to get there.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that goes back to definitions, which, like I said, they acknowledge that, but it doesn't serve their case at all, one way or the other.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is I'm just showing that an argument can actually get you to a reliable conclusion about things.
Yeah.
And so we can know something about the whole universe.
And that
so
has
that
nothing
alone
to do with
shoots
that has
down.
nothing to do with the natural world either.
That's right.
It has strictly to do with the way that we define words.
Well, it's not just how we define words.
It's not how we define mammal. I'm just saying it's bachelor by definition can't be married.
Mm-hmm. Well, stick with the square circle.
Or square circle.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how you slice it, you're not dealing with the natural world that way. And
we're dealing with transcendental things.
Right. Or abstract objects.
Abstract objects.
And so, yes, you can get to the whole truth, which undermines their entire premise.
About some things.
Because you have to have, the only way you can get to the complete truth about something through an argument is if you're dealing with elements of the natural world. Which, I mean, you can't go look around and find a circle in the natural world. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's so I wanted to say that, and
or a number or anything.
And what the only reason I want to point this out is just as a antithesis to the claim. So we find it self-defeating ultimately, and we have given an example of at least one or two places where we think this happens, right? Where you can get to the truth.
Now, what they would say is, but what your a pushback could be, but what you're saying is that kind of truth that you're talking about is a convention.
No, it's not.
Well, we decided that
things can't contradict.
Well, not that, but but we decided the whole idea about bachelors, for example.
I know.
Or
forget bachelors
circles.
for a second.
Or circles.
We didn't make up circularity, and we didn't make up.
No, I agree
squareness.
with you, but it goes back to what words you're using and concepts. They could push back and say you're just talking about conventions at that point, though.
But I didn't make up squareness. I didn't make up circularity, and the fact that those two things can't both be true of something at the same time is also not something we made up.
Right.
It's something we can get to purely through reason, and we can certainly see inductively many examples of things that don't contradict each other in reality.
Because circularity
right?
is not dependent on the word circle itself, the idea of circuit. Yeah, but exactly.
Yeah. So, like, I'm a circle realist. I believe there is a real phenomenon called circularity, even though, and I'm really tempted to get all Platonic here and talk about the fact that there is no perfect circle in creation, because on a microscopic level, you can't quite get there. And so, but we still have this knowledge of circularity, right? Which is interesting in itself. Right. How do you have an idea of a perfect circle? Plato would say that might be evidence that there is this world of higher forms, and there's a form of perfect circularity. Same with equality. You can never cut a log exactly in the middle, but we have this knowledge of things being more or less equal, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, the point that, hey, look at here, Fatheist Atheist, who always puts the most lovely comments.
He's one of the only people that actually, I think, follows the Trinity Radio Facebook page instead of the group, because he's like maybe one of 3 people who actually click the like button on something. Yeah, I really appreciate that, because we don't ever do anything with the page. We're always
But thank you so much.
Making noise in the group, but not the page.
Yeah, a perfect circle. That's a throwback.
You give Braxton purpose for posting it on our Facebook page.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't click the like button and no one did, he'd stop doing it.
Probably. All right, so let's continue with what they have to say.
There is a great band called...
Bring the evidence.
What? You want to say something about...
a tool and a perfect circle both. In my mind, and I know I'm going to offend all, what they really are is a musician's band. And then they have a few other people who consider themselves
I just remember that
elitist.
one video where he's in some weird room, wooden room with slanting ceilings, and he's writhing around.
Yeah. To me, anything Maynard does is always overrated, and it's
Thank you again, Fatheist Atheist, for another super chat. And you say the book The Knowledge Machine argues that transferable demonstrations was the key to the scientific revolution, not that this is all knowledge, just how we got AC and satellites. We'll take that under advisement, Fatheist Atheist. Thank you for the book
again.
Recommendation.
Pretentious.
Who is? That's pretentious?
No. Tool and a perfect circle are just... It's just pretentious metal. That's its own genre. Pretentious metal. That's what it is.
Okay. All right, let's go on and listen to some more.
Show a way in which the evidence shows God. And this is easily demonstrable with when you get into a conversation with an apologist and they bring up an argument that says God. They say, my question usually, and we'll probably get to this a little bit later on as well in one of the other questions, my response to an apologist's argument trying to show God is the question, okay, great. Now, what experiment can we do to confirm your conclusion? And what do we get from that? We don't get an answer which includes an experiment. We get further arguments, or we say that we're trying to do philosophy wrong, or we get equivocations. Okay, we don't actually get a straightforward answer of an experiment that would.
Well, okay, so now part of understanding that there are other ways to get to knowledge besides natural science. Mm-hmm. I know that the comments are funny, but try to pull yourself together here. We'll get to the comments at the end.
I'm sorry, I just have a difference of opinion. I mean, I'm just not a fan. Look, in the early 90s...
He's back on rock music again.
Yes, because it's actually more interesting than atheism that we talk about every week. There's more rock fans than there are atheists in this country. No, in the early 90s, I bought Tool's album and I bought Helmet's album, Helmet in the Meantime. And because people have poor taste, Helmet did not take off as big as Tool did. And I've always been a little bit miffed about that, I guess, since 1992. I've had that for decades now. But Helmet is the superior band.
I've never had either band or the perfect
You
circle.
need to go get Helmets in the Meantime. You'll like that album. You'll like it.
All right. So
back to the apologetic.
Yeah. What experiment can we do to prove 2 + 2 = 4? Right. Okay. I'm going to get back. I'll read the super chats, but I'll get back to the other comments briefly. Menstruating person of color says, that's the username. Okay. It's me, the world's most famous gender fluid Orthodox Christian. Happy Halloween. Here's your treat for Halloween.
That's a new handle from
Transgendered person of color, maybe, or something like that.
I can't remember what it was, but it's always funny.
I don't remember. But anyway, thank you for the super chat. Now, so one of the things that happens with what they've just said when you understand that scientific natural science is not the only way to get there is you understand that your how you define evidence is going to be a little different. For example, we've played 2 or 3 times on this program the illustration that Joe Schmid gave on capturing Christianity of evidence when he was responding to this very problem about evidence. There's no evidence or that sort of thing. And they do say there's no evidence. At least I think they mean because of how they define evidence. Mm-hmm. But Joe Schmid and others and also this is true of Ben Watkins and is in philosophy, it's something like this. There chips, evidential chips that fall in favor of theism or of Christian theism. And all that means is, are there things that are true about the world that are more expected on the hypothesis that God exists or that Christianity is true than they are on some other hypothesis? And since, Jonathan, in every time we do something that we're talking about evidence, I get people in the chat or in the comments saying, episode about evidence, I didn't hear any evidence. Okay, well, here's why we think that way. We think that God is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe. If the universe had a beginning, that's expected on theism. We think that design is a chip that fine-tuning, that the universe seems highly fine-tuned for life to be possible. That's more expected on theism than it is on atheism. Consciousness is more expected on theism than it is on atheism. Even if atheism turned out to be true and consciousness was still a thing, from our perspective right now, it's more expected on theism than it is on atheism. And we could say that if you believe in libertarian freedom, God's the best explanation for that. God's the best explanation for the events surrounding the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth. Mm-hmm. God's the best explanation for the popularity of Christianity in the world today. Now, you might be saying, yeah, but those aren't all like deductive arguments, and you can't even do experiments on some of those things. Right, because this is a different way of thinking about evidence. The way I've said it before, and I don't even think many in the philosophy of religion would necessarily grant me this, but like I've said many times, if I had a man come in here and tell me that at Bossy Field, our local baseball field, and one of the fields at which Field of Dreams with Tom Hanks was filmed. Did you know that?
You mean A League of Their Own?
A League of Their Own. What did I say?
Field of Dreams. That's
not Field of Dreams. Yeah, it's different.
Yeah,
sports. Sports.
And sports ball, something you know absolutely nothing about.
But
you've been going to games lately. You have been going to games lately.
Oh, I watched the World Series twice this week.
Really?
So
you didn't even mention Don Mattingly, who played ball out there.
Okay, there you go. I didn't know about that. I don't know who that is.
Well, they have a statue.
Oh, the statue guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Made famous by the statue in Evansville.
Made famous because of New York.
Okay. So, but if I had one person come to me in the office today and say, "You don't know me, but I want you to know, I'm telling you the truth. An alien spacecraft landed in Bossy Field last night." Okay. Now, do I have a reason to believe that happened? Well, I have more reason to believe it happened than I did before the guy came in, and I'll prove it to you. What if instead I had 50 people come and tell me that, and some of them were academics, intellectuals, some were just, everyday, whatever job they have, the spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. And I have 50 people come. Do I have more reason now to believe that this happened, or at least that a UFO, an unidentified flying object, forget aliens, was there in Bossy Field? Yes, I have more reason with 50 people telling me that of various backgrounds and credentials than I do with one person telling me that.
Okay,
which means that one person was more evidence than none. 50 people is more evidence. What if I had 500? Now I've got a lot more reason to believe. It doesn't mean it's true. And when one person or 50 or 500 tell me, it doesn't even mean that I necessarily should believe that that's what happened. But what it does mean is that is more that sort of a phenomenon is not surprising if that actually happened, right? It would fall in favor of that.
Yes, but the pushback to your situation there is, well, as unlikely as UFOs sightings are, right? That's still part of the natural world and still more likely than the kind of phenomenon that you would describe.
It doesn't matter. The point about this is just to say, this is how I think about evidence.
Yeah.
And so when you then apply that to transcendental things, like if you have God's existence sans the physical universe and all these kind of things, that we can still look at it similarly. We can look at it and say, okay, what gives me reason to believe that? Are there things that are more expected on the hypothesis of theism or Christianity in the world than the negation of those things?
Right.
And so I think we can do that. Now, obviously, if you have repeatable experiments for a particular phenomenon, of course that counts as evidence. And it might be that what people are saying really is you're saying that, well, you get much more certain evidence if you can do repeated experiments than you can with something like this. But even with that, I'm not even sure that in every case that's necessarily true. I'll grant that it's often true, but think about a memory that I have of something that happened in my past that I am absolutely convinced happened. I can't do repeated experiments on that event, but I'm more certain of it than, like, say when you and I went to the Southern Baptist Convention in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm as certain as I can be. In the colloquial sense, I'm certain that happened. Okay. And I'm more certain that happened than I am some repeatable things I could do in natural science today. And yet there's no repeatable experiment to demonstrate that happened to me. So I'm just saying there are things like that to consider. Okay, I want to throw this up here because hold on. Rich O'Cat is new Trinity student here and relatively new listener. Thank you, gentlemen, for what you do. Have to go to work for now. We'll listen to the rest later. And that's when you'll find out, if you already have left, that we love you and we're so glad that you're here.
Yes. Well, I'm actually more glad that you're a Trinity student than watching this on YouTube, but I appreciate both. But what I guess it's devil's advocate day for me, because I was going to say, though, but somebody could concede to you that, Braxton, yes, that's sufficient. It could still be true, right? And that's sufficient enough for you to believe it's true, but not for anyone else.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I'm just,
but how would you respond to that?
Oh, I would just say, you're absolutely right. My personal memory of a particular thing that no one else has access to may have to just take my word about that.
Yeah.
Yet, for me, I have a higher degree but for me, because we're not talking about my production of that evidence of a memory for someone else. We're just talking about how evidence works or how certainty works. And I'm much more confident in that memory. I am much more confident than I am about some repeatable experiments.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, that's how the evidence shakes out. All I'm doing there is providing a defeater to the claim that not that they've made this claim, but I think it's what drives this approach, that repeated experiments give us the most certain kind of evidence.
Right.
And I don't think, or the most certain conclusions. And I don't think that's necessarily always the case.
No.
And that was just a defeater for that. So that'd be how I'd respond to that. So, all right, let's continue listening to them.
Help to confirm the conclusion. And that should be a red flag.
It should. And in fact, it's hard to see, in some sense, what experiment could provide evidence, because a great many Orthodox Christian traditions, God is a non-physical, non-temporal being. It's hard to see what sort of experiment we could do.
Exactly. And this is why Ravissary 79 says, how do you present physical evidence from inside the universe of something not physical outside the universe? And you can't find that. How does it prove nothing immaterial outside of the universe? In other words,
right. Everything we said in the first.
Everything we're saying.
Everything we said in the first response.
Repeated experiments of that sort you do in natural science aren't even in the category of the right sorts of things.
Right.
That you do. Now, you could do it with some things in teleological arguments, for example. You could say, my suggestion is that as we do repeated experiments, we're going to find complexity of the sort that seems like a chip that falls in favor of a designer.
No, and
something
I,
like
I
that.
get what they're saying, but what we essentially have right here is a self-defeating epistemology that leads to the compounding of their error with category mistakes.
So let's keep going now.
Demonstrate that a non-temporal, non-physical being existed.
Yeah, I'd like to bring a real life example into this, because it's all well and good talking around these nuanced subjects and talking vaguely about things. So I'd like to bring a real world example of how arguments based on something that might or might not be a fact don't necessarily give you the right conclusion. Here is the scenario.
Well, now, hold on. We're willing to grant that. We're willing to grant that you could reason wrongly and get the wrong conclusion.
Yes. Well, I mean, you can make a formally invalid argument, or you can make an argument with that's formally valid, but the premises of those arguments are less likely plausible than not.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And now there is a good point that they make in this, and they already made it a while ago. But this is important, which is you can have an argument that is valid and yet is not sound. In other words, the argument, the mechanics of the argument are correct.
Valid, but it's formally valid,
but not sound.
But the conclusion is false.
Right, and that would mean it's not sound. So our argument needs to be valid. Like most of your atheists will admit that the Kalam is a valid argument. There's no lot. The problem is,
well, they all should admit that. I mean, it's formally valid.
Right. Because it
is.
It's demonstrable that it is. But they're wanting to know, is it sound? Like, is the conclusion correct?
Right. Well, yeah. Some people will challenge.
Forget Kalam, because that.
They'll challenge the truth of the premises, or they'll challenge that the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises.
But with a design argument, like say Craig's design argument that says the fine-tuning of the universe, for life to be possible, is either due to physical necessity, chance, or intelligent design.
Yeah.
Premise 2, it is not due to physical necessity or chance. Therefore, it is due to intelligent design. Now, that may be a valid argument, but the challenge is it true or not? So that's a real thing that we need to be aware of. But I think they think we're saying something stronger than we say with some of this.
Yeah. I like Atheist. If you scroll up just a tad bit, he just made a good comment about experiments are not about certainty. It's just about what works.
Where's that?
Up a little bit more. Yeah, there he goes. That one.
Also, repeated experiments aren't so much about certainty as they are about what works. You can doubt all you want as you repeat the experiments, and you can hate achieving the same results. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's true too.
And this is why we say we're not saying that we don't think that counts as evidence. Of course it does.
Yeah. Well, but even there though, you can get the same result from repeating the same experiment, but be wrong about the mechanics because some of the underlying ideas behind why that results, you could be wrong on that as well. So yeah, this will lead to that 20 out of 20 times, but you may be wrong why. So I mean that's always possible because you're not looking deep enough through the microscope to see what's mechanics are at play. But, that can happen.
Like I say, this is a real world scenario. It's an event that genuinely happened. It's probably about 20 years old. My wife had.
Okay, I want you to listen to this analogy because this is going to be a fun part of it, I think.
A car accident. It's about 20 years ago. Somebody ran it. It was a head-on accident. It was relatively low speed accident.
Not that it's fun to think about someone he knows being in a car accident or whatever, but the analogy.
So there was no serious injuries. She did get damage to her foot from the foot pedal as a result from the argument, and she did have some bruising, but it wasn't a serious accident in terms of being airlifted to hospital, etc. Anyway, so she had this head-on car accident. It was the other driver's fault. She was in a coned-off section of the highway. It was supposed to be her right of way, and this person came around the corner in the same section of coned-off highway and hit her head-on. Now, there were supposed to be traffic lights controlling this section of highway because it was coned off. There were roadworks going on. It was round a corner. You couldn't see the exit out the other end, so you didn't know whether it was safe. There was supposed to be traffic lights controlling it. And My wife said the light was green for her to go, and the person that hit her said there wasn't a traffic light at the other end. Is his statement that there wasn't a traffic light at the other end good enough to consider as evidence that there was in fact no traffic light at the other end? And that's a straightforward question. How would you answer that question, Andrew?
On balance of probability, it seems unlikely that there's no traffic light on his side. We tend to put traffic lights up at intersections where we expect people would bump into each other without them.
Yeah.
Right? So on balance of probability, it seems unlikely. I can't say that I buy his story, even in the most charitable case.
Yeah. In fact, what it turns out was the case was it was really unfortunate timing, and a works vehicle was passing in front of the traffic light that was at his end, so he didn't see it, so he just plowed straight on in.
Okay, now that's not a situation that I would have thought of, but the thing that we all know is when you're approaching an intersection, it is not just on one driver or the other to be cautious.
This isn't, I don't think this is really the point that the other guy's trying to make. So, but bear with it, because this is, I want to make sure you hear what he says would count as being an acceptable way of providing evidence about this, which is just to go check yourself.
Yeah. And before you continue to bear with this, we do, Mr. Phil Fox had a birthday the other day. And he's soon to run out of his younger years of life and catch up with Braxton, and but he's not there yet. But we do want to wish him a happy birthday. Everyone wish him Mr. Phil Fox a happy birthday in the comments. And since I know y'all didn't get him anything for his birthday, go subscribe to his channel as a gift for his birthday and watch some videos.
Yeah, and SlamRN says, who are these guys? And it is the Still Unbelievable podcast. I don't think there's a YouTube channel. All right, back to them.
Mm-hmm.
When you're approaching an intersection, I live in the United States. I only know what our driver's manuals say, but I've got to presume that your driver's manuals say the same thing to all drivers. When you're approaching an intersection, lights don't give you, or lack of lights don't give you the impetus to throw away caution.
Exactly. So the point that I'm trying to eke out of this is, while his statement was there was no traffic light at his end, and while it's technically true that he didn't see one, that is not evidence that there wasn't a traffic light.
Right.
There was a traffic light. The evidence is he didn't see the traffic light that was there. The evidence is not there was no traffic light. That's the point I'm trying to eke out of this. So when apologists and philosophers try to say this happened and it was evidence of God. I mentioned earlier that I had a deliverance experience. Now, somebody would say, and in fact, while I was still a Christian, I would say that my deliverance experience was evidence for God. And it was one of the things that held me in Christianity for the longest. It wasn't until I was able to dismiss that experience that I was actually able to dismiss Christianity itself. So the question is, was that experience that I was holding on to
I can hear people yawning over the internet.
for God? Or was it evidence?
You have an overestimation of that they'd rather hear you talk than these guys talk.
No, I'm not saying that either.
That our mind is a really complex structure, and that under certain stressful situations, it will produce to us things that are slightly more comforting to us. And in my specific case, presented something that I was familiar with. In other words, Christianity and something bad.
I didn't actually remember that he went off about this deliverance story.
Controlling me.
I mean, it's fascinating to hear them talk about, but I'm just...
So there's the point that I'm trying to get to. So Christians, apologists specifically, or Christian philosophers, will take things from the world and experiences and events and objects, and they'll phrase them into an argument and say this is evidence for God. And the question I want to throw back in there is it really? Like the guy who failed to see the traffic light and gave the wrong report. Like me with my deliverance experience and gave it the wrong report. Is the things that apologists and philosophers bring that they claim?
Okay, well, I can't find it, but you'll just have to trust me that basically they say at some point you would go and check, is there a traffic light there?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. And if we have the means to do that really quick, or if we have a means to do that at all, then yes, that would be a great way. That would certainly count as evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But notice what I'm saying here. So don't take me to say if one guy comes into my office and says a UFO landed on Bosse Field, I'm not saying I should believe that. I don't think I should believe it. The question is, do I have a reason to believe it now that I didn't have before? Well, yeah, I do. So there's some evidence on the way I think about it, but that doesn't mean I'm ready to accept it. I mean, that was the whole point of going through, what if you had 50 people? What if you had 500 people? So when we talk about the traffic light, the guy's saying there was no traffic light, and that's why I did that. That's why this happened. Is that possibly evidence in the sense that I have a reason now to believe this that I didn't have before? I think so, but that doesn't mean I should believe him. I think I should consider all the evidence. So how could you now here's the thing. There actually was a light there. I think that flipping their analogy around mirrors what they're trying to analogize better, because we're asking the question. It's more like saying, is God there or not? Would be more like you're saying, I have no reason to believe there's a traffic light there.
Right.
And we're saying, no, there is a traffic light there. And they're saying, well, what's your evidence? Well, yeah, I mean, to step out of the analogy, with this analogy, you could, with a traffic light, just drive down there and take a look.
Right.
Right. But what you could do here is you could say, all right, I'm saying there is a light, and this guy is saying let's say there's not a light. And this works with the analogy as they said it. And we'd say, okay, I have this evidence, but what's the other evidence? Well, for example, we could reason that the amount of traffic accidents at that intersection are far fewer than what we would expect to be the case if there wasn't a traffic light there.
Yeah.
We would expect this to happen a lot more. And as it turns out, there are about as many traffic accidents at this intersection as there are at intersections that we know where we've studied these things,
That
where
have
something like
lights.
that.
Yeah.
Now, you might want to come back and say, and I'll challenge myself with this. Someone might say, well, that would also be kind of an experimental sort of thing, but not on the thing we're talking about. And I took his analogy to be that what represents the repeatable experiments is actually going there and looking at it with your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm offering that, no, you could actually provide evidence without ever going to that thing to come to a solid conclusion.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That there is
that there is a
traffic light without ever having to go look at it.
Right.
Yes, you could do that. But the fact that and in principle, if you can do it with that, you can do it for immaterial things, is where you're trying to go with this.
Right. That's right.
But they say is, but I always have in my back pocket that if push came to shove,
mm-hmm.
I can take them to see a traffic light. You can't take them to see an immaterial being.
Let's imagine you couldn't go to visit that traffic light, because all analogies fall apart at some point.
Right.
And as Eric Hernandez, who happens to be in the chat and gave us a super chat just a second ago, often says, is that, wait a minute, here it is. You're attacking the analogy instead of the point of the analogy.
Right.
Right.
Well,
So first of all, Phil Fox says, love the content and thank you for the support. Blessings and prayers, fam.
Well,
thank you,
I
Mr.
love
Phil
you,
Fox, for that
and I love
fantastic-
your content, and I think everyone should go subscribe, and I'm glad that you had a happy birthday.
Amen. And Eric says, and thank you for the super chat, sounds like he needs to register for our next Unapologetics Evangelism Conference at TexasApologetics.org, where me and him and Inspiring Philosophy and Eric Hernandez
himself
are all going to be speaking in just a few weeks.
Yeah.
So go to that.
It's in Chandler, Texas. This right
Crandall,
next to
Crandall, Texas, outside of Dallas.
Outside of Dallas.
And it's Central Baptist Church in Crandall, Texas, is where it's going to be.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for that. Let's see. Do atheists ever go to that conference? Danny asks. I don't know if they do or not, but they certainly could. Danny, no one's going to throw them out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the same time, we do this with a lot of things. We're actually, you're a happily married man. Does your wife love you?
Yes.
Do you love your wife?
Yes.
Prove it in a way that couldn't be imitated with a brain scan if you ate chocolate. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We do this with all kinds of things. We believe all kinds of things that aren't like a traffic light anyway. So not only can you demonstrate a traffic light is there without seeing it, you can demonstrate all kinds of things without having to see it with your eyes. So.
Okay. Let's keep trucking. We won't listen to too much more of this.
Evidence for God, really evidence for something else instead, and they're misattributing it to be evidence for God. So that's my...
Well, that could be. Again, that could be. Of course, what then would happen is after we present an argument, is then we argue about it. You know, it's debated, it's tossed back and forth, and what you would need to do there is attempt to defeat that argument.
The challenge to Braxton's question here and the conclusion that he has, which is why I go to the question, okay, fine, there's your conclusion. What experiment can we do to confirm your conclusion? Because that's what we need to do. That's how science works. That's what we need to do.
You see, he says that's how science works, presuming that scientific...
Right. So we're back to the self-defeating epistemology and the categorical errors.
I mean, I think that's what happened, and I think that's what happens. And I'll admit, again, here's what we're admitting: that scientific investigation is helpful with many things, and repeated experiments, repeatable experiments, are very helpful for many things.
Yeah.
They're not the only way to get to knowledge.
Right.
Or even the conclusion that that's the best way to get to
Nor did up until
or the only
maybe
way,
20 years ago, I don't know how long this new atheist shtick has been going on. No one ever believed that it was until recently. In fact, I mean, people were...
Well, there was scientism.
People were suggesting it. Yeah, people were suggesting it for but I'm talking about in the popular... But I mean, yeah, I mean, even Robert Hutchins was refuting this in the 50s when they were putting out the great books and like, come on, this kind of, it's nonsense. I've read the quote. That was in the 50s. But I'm saying, but this sentiment outside of the academy that just science or nothing, science or this mantra that you get from the scientism that has affected the atheist YouTuber and podcasting community. That kind of popularization of that kind of worldview is 20 years old.
Yeah, and Vera says, I still don't understand how science became the antonym to Christianity, and I'm a scientist. So yeah, do not concede that science is like the property of atheism or something. Many of your atheists, at least people popularly interacting on YouTube or something, many of these people don't really have a science background any more than most people have a science background.
Yes.
So it's not your property. It doesn't belong to you. We think that the world is rational because it reflects a rational mind.
Right. Christianity, and I guess you could argue theism, gives you the necessary prerequisite framework for which science is possible. Or if you want, or atheists, you need to listen to Alex Rosenberg, who would just freely admit it's all gibberish. And that you'd have to toss science at that, because anytime you try to communicate anything from science, you're spewing gibberish, meaningless nonsense into the cosmos. So,
Braxton will have
the bullets they won't bite except for Alex Rosenberg, right?
Yeah.
So anyway,
Braxton will have to get married again in front of me to believe he is married. He could have photoshopped his marriage pics. That's right. That's absolutely right.
Certainly could have.
All right.
But I would not be lying if I would be lying. But there was a threat that if Braxton had not shown up, that his wife still would have got married that day.
Yeah, there was a threat about that. That's your favorite sermon.
That's my favorite sermon illustration is the story of his wedding day with the rain. And we've told it before on the podcast.
Yeah, we won't do that again. But
that's for the that's an Easter egg for the real fans.
Yeah. So all right. So let's finish this off.
To validate it, to confirm this guy's claim that there wasn't a traffic light, what experiment do? You walk to the other end and you have a look.
Right. And I will say here, just as maybe slightly tangentially, though I don't think very much. If you witness, so let's just say that you had some experience. You saw somebody have a limb regrown, or you saw somebody turn water to wine, or somebody's stick became a snake and ate somebody else's stick that became a snake. It's not my fault. It's in the book of Exodus. I'm not making this stuff up. Somebody prays and or smites a stone with a rod and water comes from it. And let's just say that you have good reason to think that a God did it. And let me also say, it's the kind of evidence that other people should buy. right? So you've got this
Now,
story.
are y'all following what he's saying here? He's saying you see something that seems to be a miracle, like water to wine, or walking on the water, or whatever, regrowing a limb.
And Matthew and I should buy it too, because your evidence is that compelling. You're still not getting me very far. And here's why. Getting water from a stone doesn't equal there's a heaven. Getting water from a stone doesn't equal there's a hell. Getting water from a stone doesn't equal that there's somebody who can rightly divide the good guys and the bad guys. Getting water from a stone doesn't mean that there's somebody that can be in all places at all times. And I could go on like this for a long time. And so what I'm saying to you is this: even if Matthew should have believed his experience, it doesn't mean he should believe every other possible story.
Yeah,
Right.
and we've never made that claim.
Absolutely.
We've never made that claim.
Well, and let's
and nobody's ever even made the claim. And you stressed this your first time
Mr.
around.
Phil Fox just
Yeah.
became a channel member.
Woohoo!
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Phil
you, thank
Fox.
you. You stress this all the time when you say, I'm going to give an argument or a case. I'm going to give a case that begins with the Kalam. You know, we go through this all the time with folks. We've said repeatedly on this program that, I mean, just because we believe a miracle claim doesn't mean we therefore believe all miracle claims. We don't say because of this jump a chasm, therefore Christianity, right? It's a cumulative case, so to speak, that you present. And then after so much of everything seems to point to this, yeah, Christianity's true, right? There's this, and this, and it just, okay, with all this, it's just, come on, Christianity's true, right? But nobody has ever made the claim that, because this sort of weird phenomenon occurred, therefore Christianity's true. No, it could be any number of
and that's
weird
the rant that we need to make. First of all, Slam RN just became a member.
Woohoo!
Praise the Lord. What would we do?
2 in one day.
Okay. First of all, I'd love for you to come by, Danny. I really feel like we've had limited but good backs and forths, and you've always been cool in the chat. And so we'd love to have that. And Atheist.
Wow.
Follow-up, Strevin's knowledge machine also says that living purely by repeatable experiments would be irrational. Not the only kind of knowledge, but irrational. Yeah, that's wow. That's cool. Thank you, Atheist. Okay.
I agree with that as well.
So what they're saying here about two things I want to say about this. First of all, yes, you're absolutely right. Not just that if we accept one miracle, it doesn't mean we accept anyone who claims a miracle. But
or two, that any one miracle leads to,
and that's where I want to say is before this week is over, and today is Friday, and I mean this, before Saturday at midnight, I will have heard at least one atheist on YouTube say that, Burke Hamblin just became a channel member.
Hey,
thank you, Burke. Cool profile pic. Thank you so much. Oh, but here, Slam RN says, here's the best way to support Trinity Radio, and that's our Patreon. And by the way, following this stream, we're going to break for 10 minutes, and then we're going to do a private stream just for patrons, and you can access it just simply by going to patreon.com/Trinity Radio and becoming a patron of the channel. And then right there, you'll see a YouTube window for this that I need to make. But thank you for that. But when we present, I will hear an atheist say, well, the Kalam or a contingency argument or whichever argument doesn't necessarily doesn't get you to the Christian God. It just gives you some God of the philosophers. Right. It's a two-step approach. We're classical apologists. First, you show that God exists. Then second, you show that God raised Jesus from the dead. And the reason for that is there's a higher likelihood that Jesus raised from the dead if there was a God to have raised Jesus from the dead. And so, so there you go. That's right, Vera. Patrons getting some love. And then secondly, I want to say, hold on. If you saw water into wine, or if you saw a limb regrow, or whatever it is you're talking about, and it's not that event in and of itself, if it took place in a religiously informed theater where people are right then praying for this to happen, and people are saying that it's going to happen or whatever, and then it happens. First of all, there's something predictive there. But secondly, even if you don't want to go that route, the truth is it actually is evidence from weekly at least, for something other than just the event that happened, because it took place in a religiously informed theater. It's like when people say, well, if Jesus really did raise from the dead somehow, that doesn't mean that the Christian God exists. Okay, I see what you mean. Fair enough. But where it happened, how it happened, that Jesus thought of himself as God's special agent to bring about the kingdom, puts a religious trapping around this that makes that more likely given this event. And so I think that's important.
And a religiously informed theater actually could apply to a conversation that they were having about lottery tickets. And, it seems like it's so impractical that, well, even with a lottery ticket, right? What if you have a religiously charged context surrounding that this church had put out a list of all the charitable things that they were going to do, and they really, really meant that they were going to do all of these charitable acts and all that if they won if like Miss Bessie, her lottery ticket won, right? Because you always have a Miss Bessie in a church, and she's the one that's holding you up at the line at the gas station. And turns out she won that lottery. Mm-hmm. Now, winning the lottery is already improbable, right? But there's no miracle claim there. Mm-hmm. But I would suggest that, given the highly charged religious theater of that, even something that, doesn't seem miraculous, why that one? And the reason why I say that is the same thing from why the ground opening up and swallowing at Korah. It's not necessarily the kind of miracle claim that we're talking about, right? Because it could be seemingly natural.
Yeah, we talked about, you always use that, and I always use the Jordan River stopping its flow right when they needed to cross, and people saying, oh, but the Jordan River's prone to mudslides and it dams up the river. Okay, yeah, but it happened right when God said it would, or right when people believed God said it would, and when the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant put their feet in the water stopped. When judgment was pronounced, Korah was devoured by the earth.
Yeah, religiously charged contexts can make what you can offer a naturalistic explanation for the physical phenomena that occurred that seems, that we count as a miracle. Because, technically speaking, even if you took however Jesus healed the centurion's right ear, right, take an amputee case or whatever, even if we ever found the natural explanation for that, the fact that it has a natural explanation for how those tissues were reconnected or whatever Jesus did. I know, assuming you believe the story, whatever. But that doesn't discount the miraculous event that occurred given its religiously charged theater. So the fact that you have a stick that turns into a snake and eats another one, that to me is not the impressive part. The impressive part for me about that story is Moses' snake winning. So,
yes, Mr. Green, that is a record. He says member pile-on, 3 new members in a row. I think that is a record.
Yeah.
Now, Alex P. says most of theistic arguments are trying to appeal to our everyday intuitions to infer fundamental nature of reality. I'd rather believe we live in a simulation. That's at least demonstrably possible. Well, I'm not so sure, because what you would first have to demonstrate that has not been demonstrated is that you could get genuine consciousness from a computer program. Now, you have to presume a form of naturalism and that there is no soul or anything immaterial as a part of us in order to say that our physical bodies are evidence of that, which is, of course, part of what we're all arguing here about. So you can't do that. So you first demonstrate that you could have 8 billion player characters in a simulation that are conscious, not that there is a real human being who's a brain in a vat, but rather that computer code that is you could be conscious. So actually, that's not been demonstrated to be possible yet. Maybe one day it will. I don't think so.
Oh, it gets worse. If it is a simulation, you
still have to figure it out.
Yeah, you have to.
You push the problem back a step.
Right, because you know what? And all of the Matrix stories or whatever, everyone who discovered it was a simulation was because they were rescued from someone outside of the simulation, requiring a transcendent to the simulation to do it.
Right.
Okay, and so from within the simulation, how do you know that it's demonstrably possible? Any more than it's demonstrably possible, guess what? It's even better for Christianity because God showed up on earth.
Right.
Multiple times, but culminating in the life of person in the incarnation of Jesus. So we already have that too. So the case for Christianity blows out the simulation hypothesis as far as what's more believable, and the demonstration, is equivalently the same. The transcendent comes into the creation, right? Just like the outside, just like Morpheus came from the outside to get Neo, right? So I'm just saying that the demonstrating the simulation, that seems to be exactly what.
And it's
according to work in our favor, not the favor of the atheist.
He says it's simulations all the way down, and obviously what he's referring to is the notion that, well, the Earth sits on the back of a turtle, which sits on the back of another turtle, which sits on the back of another turtle, and well, what's at the bottom of all these turtles? Well, it's just turtles all the way down, right? That's not really an answer, but even if it were, you'd still have the problem of why does there exist an infinite chain of turtles instead of an infinite chain of Brads from Carolina standing on top of each other. So
why is there multiple simulations rather than nothing?
Right. So if you believe you're in a simulation, then if the simulation is running and you don't believe that the simulation is the mind of God or something, well, then you have to believe that there is a higher order with other persons running the simulation. Well, maybe they're in a simulation. This is turning into Inception all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say there are 20. Let's say there are 20 billion simulations all the way up. At some point, you're going to get to a base real world reality, and you still have to answer the theistic arguments. This serves absolutely no one in terms of escaping theistic arguments.
Right.
Okay. All right. So we're done with that now. But thank you guys for covering it, and we'll respond to some of the other things you said. And I hope you don't feel talking to the podcasters at Still Unbelievable. I hope you don't feel like we were uncool or uncharitable. Pritchett probably doesn't care about that, but I do. So I hope you see that. All right. Hervey Schmervy says, how many books behind Pritchett has he read through fully?
Now, wait a minute. This is not my bookshelf. This is Braxton's bookshelf.
He's in my office.
Probably very few of those books, because my taste in books are superior to Braxton's taste in books. So
wait a minute.
I probably wouldn't read that many of those books.
I think do I still have it? No, I don't still have it.
Question 2.
Question number. I thought I had still where we did that video tour of the office.
Yeah.
But I don't.
But yeah, probably not many of them. If probably less than 1% of those books are worth reading. So, no, I'm just kidding. I'm sure there's good books over there.
Well, I mean, more than 1% of them probably are your books. So.
Well, the ones I didn't want, I put them on your shelf.
Slam RN says, I thought it was Friday all day yesterday. She sent me a DM on Twitter and said, you're not going to stream today? And I said, well, we'll stream tomorrow. That's when we usually stream. And I said, but I was in Florida all week. That's why there wasn't another episode of Trinity Radio this week, is because I had a death in the family. 3 deaths, really, of a friend of the family or a family member in the past couple of weeks. So, but yep, we're here today. All right. And Slavic Stris says, hey, I'm a up-and-coming app developer. Would you guys like me to build you guys an app? I would absolutely love to talk to you about building an app.
That would be cool.
Reach out to me on one of our social platforms in some private way, and I'm grateful that you would raise that up. That would be a huge thing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And if it had a way to pull the YouTube videos and the audio podcast into the same app, that would encourage me to be more keep up with the podcast side of things. But thank you so much. That is just so awesome.
And we'll close on the super chat.
Do what?
We'll close the show on the super chat.
That's a good idea. Here is Trevor Adams. Thank you for that super chat. Says, sorry, not related, but what are your interpretations of Hebrews 6:4-6, namely about it being impossible to renew someone to repentance who has fallen away?
We've talked about this in previous episodes, but I don't expect you to dig through all that. So I'll give a brief answer. Well, I obviously agree that it's impossible to renew some people to repentance after they've fallen away. What does that mean? Is it logically impossible for anyone who falls away to not come back to the faith? No, but there's not a logical impossibility.
It's hyperbolic.
It's a hyperbolic, rhetorical impossibility, because what you're talking about is people who have tasted and experienced all of this Christianity. There's nothing you're going to say to them that they don't already know. Right. And they're just they know that walking away is trampling the blood of Jesus. And they know all of that.
That's
there's nothing right. So those kind of people, yeah, it's it's basically impossible. But is it ontologically, logically impossible for someone who apostatizes to never come back to the faith? No, that's not what it's saying. It's just hyperbolic.
I think so. And I just thought of it yesterday or a couple days ago because I was listening to the Church Split podcast, and they were talking about some guy who was I didn't know this guy or the podcast, but there's a podcast called The Preacher Boys, I think, and they were focusing on like, or at least much of what they focused on was like abuses in the church and stuff. And one of the guys who's on The Preacher Boys, yes, Slam, you can post stuff here. One of those guys has become an atheist, or at least walked away from Christianity. I don't really know all the details. If I'm getting this wrong, I'm sorry. Just go check out the Church Split episode, and they play him talking about it. But I thought about this. I thought, in reaching out to a guy like that who had a podcast devoted to Christianity, it's going to be so much harder to reach a person like that because they used to give many of the same answers that you're giving.
Right.
And that makes it very, very difficult. And it can but now that sort of a person should be cautious because they could think they could wrongly think that because of their familiarity with these issues that they already know everything we're going to say, and it might not be. Yeah. And I think what happens many times with atheists, and this guy in the Still Unbelievable show, those guys were saying that, one of them at least, that they first walked away or became interested in these issues because of they didn't like young Earth creationism or came to believe that evolution was true. Well, I think a lot of people do that, and then they start a channel, and it's only then that they realize there are these robust arguments, and it's a little more serious than just, oh, I don't like these young Earth creation. I don't like Ken Ham, I think Kent Hovind's a joke, so it gets much more involved. Now, obviously, many do know that, but I think that happens a lot, and then once they're there, they've already committed to this thing, and but in any case, the people that know these things, it's going to be harder to reach them.
Yeah, it's not a metaphysical claim. Yeah, so language given to clients in the ancient Mediterranean world goes in one direction, and if you've ever read something like Seneca's on benefits or something, you'll notice that the statements and the instructions for patrons typically goes in an opposite, almost contradictory way as well. And so a lot of this is for emphasis and for bolstering the clients, right? A lot of this language, it does seem a little bit ratcheted up, and it should be. And a lot of ancient language about how instructions given to the socially acceptable behavior for clients to act in a certain way. It's all bound in the patron-client reciprocity system of the ancient Mediterranean world, which Hebrews, go get Perseverance and Gratitude by David De Silva. Excellent book, commentary on Hebrews. Go get that and check it out, because he goes into all of that in a lot more detail, and I think it sorts out a lot of the theological things that people argue about that entirely miss the point because they're reading the Bible as metaphysics too much. They're over-reading Scripture as metaphysics instead of understanding the Scriptures in their socio-rhetorical context of the ancient Mediterranean world.
All right. And with that, we're going to go on over to... I'm going to put up a link in just a moment. So if you become a patron and you don't see the post there, that's okay. I'm going to put it up really quickly. A link to a unlisted live stream in the Patreon group. We'd love to see you there. And with that, we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.